Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Running from the Mirror, a Memoir, by Howard Shulman, narrated by David Vries. 1. 3 days after his birth, a perfect baby, the carrier of his young parents' dreams and ambitions, became what some would call a monster. Like ants on honey, a bacterial infection consumed his face, and as quickly as his face disappeared, so did his mother and father. The newborn his parents had been prepared to take home and raise as their beloved son was no longer the child they had the courage to claim. I was that baby. Despite their valiant efforts, the doctors, with their arsenal of antibiotics, could not push back the bacteria's devastating aggression. When it finally ran its course, my nose, lower right eyelid, tear ducts, lips, and palate had been eaten away, leaving behind a gaping hole. Though they lasted so briefly, I can't help but imagine the joyful first days of my life. It's July 17, 1961, and I see my father, filled with youthful optimism, tapping his knuckle against the nursery window. Nodding, the nurse retrieves me from my bassinet and carries me to where he waits, his smile widening at the sight of me. Reluctantly, he turns away and heads down the brightly lit corridor to my mother's room, passing on his way a stream of immaculately starched nurses who smile at his telltale strut of new fatherhood. At his wife's door, he uprights the bouquet of yellow roses he carries, and, seeing that she is sleeping, quietly crosses to her bedside. He hesitates, then bends down to press a kiss to her forehead. Her eyes, heavy with sleep, open. "Hello," he murmurs. "Have you seen him?" she asks, her words slurred. "Yes, he's perfect. Get some rest now." When he stops by the following day, he finds my mother propped up in bed, holding the bundle that is me, a look of contentment on her face. Smiling, she hands me to my father, who cradles me in his arms. "Howard, Howard, hello, my son." On the third day in my anti-fairy tale, as my dad prepares to leave his office to visit his wife and baby, the phone rings. "Mr. Shulman, I'm calling about your son." The doctor's voice is grave. "You need to get to the hospital immediately." "Why? What's wrong?" "I'll explain when I see you." "Please tell my wife I'm on my way." Oblivious to the blare of midday horns or the route he travels, my father maneuvers his car through traffic, his mind on nothing but the chilling tone of the doctor's words. His panic mounts, and he speeds toward the hospital. Out of breath, he pauses in the doorway of his wife's room, unaware that the fear he sees in her face is mirrored in his own. In 2 swift strides, he is at her side and reaches for her hand. She begs him to do something, anything, to make whatever is wrong right again. A faint knock announces the doctor. His jaw is tense, his eyes serious. "Your son has contracted a staph infection in his face," he says. "He's very sick right now, but I want to assure you we're doing everything we can." In the movie I carry in my head, I'm a healthy, robust baby nursing contentedly, the familiar rhythm of my mother's heart and sound of her voice lulling me to sleep. All is well with my world, and then, in one unmistakable shift, just as I am getting used to lights and startling noises, to alien air and strange materials assaulting my skin, I have a growing sense that something is very wrong. Suddenly, my face is on fire, and I am swallowed up in pain, my shuddering cries garbled by fluids pouring from my nose and mouth leave me gasping for breath. Sharp, biting jabs pierce my veins and tubes ravage my throat. Where is my mother? Where is she? Why doesn't she come? Doesn't she hear me? I scream and scream and scream until only exhaustion quiets me. My mother is gone. and will not return, leaving me adrift on a raft of pain so unbearable that all I can do is shut down. Even before any capacity for thought has formed, I know my world has shattered. 2. Abandoned by my parents, I was made a ward of the state of New Jersey. For the next 18 years of my life, I was identified as case number XUG 905. Perhaps my parents assumed or even prayed I would not survive, or perhaps they believed that without a face, their son had become something less than human, incapable of loving and being loved. Maybe wishful thinking played a part, that someone without their anguish and ego of bloodline would make me theirs and spare me the torment of failure. Whatever the basis of their decision, I know nothing about it. What I do know of those first years has been reconstructed in the manner of my face, bit by bit, stitch by stitch. I endured scores of operations, ultimately as many as 100. Unable to nurse or drink from a bottle, I was fed intravenously, my hands tethered with strips of cloth to my hospital crib to keep me from tearing at my bandages. Through it all, the one person I most wanted to reach out for had long gone. I have hazy memories of sitting in a cage-like crib, watching anonymous caretakers through the bars as they read me stories that ended too soon, abruptly returning me to the stark loneliness of institutional life in a hospital. Attachments I made never lasted, leaving me confused and unsettled by a parade of new faces. The consistent characters in my life came mostly from the stories read to me, a lifeline I grew to depend on. One book I remember had a large pop-up purple dragon, its back jagged and scaled, that both delighted and scared me. How I would hug that dragon, cuddling it as if it were my friend. The story, read to me through a plastic barrier that encased my crib to ward off infection, captivated me with its magical powers. The distant and muted words, filtered as they were through the thick, milky plastic, added to the fairy tale-like sensation of seeing the dragon as if through a mist, instilling in me the certainty that there is magic in the world. For me, this life was normal. The staff and hospital were the only family and home I'd ever known. In a strange way, I was fortunate because I had never experienced anything different. The hard part was the psychological trauma of abandonment that would develop all too soon, that mere surgery could never fix. Those wounds would take a lifetime to mend. "Howard, hold still! Just a few more things to check and we'll be done." Recoiling at the harshness in the doctor's voice, I willed my stubby little legs to stop scissoring the chilly air. Not an easy feat, perched on his examination table with paper uncomfortably wadded under me, and my anxiety mounting as I sought to avoid the rage of the man I feared. When I was days old, my medical condition had been so dire that I was transferred from the hospital in New Jersey to Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, and my care put in the hands of Dr. Richard Grotz. Our relationship could best be described as something akin to that of Dr. Frankenstein and his monster creation. He the demigod, and I his diminutive work in progress. As a ward of the state, and with no caseworker who understood the ramifications of experimental medical procedures or cosmetic surgery, I had no one to oversee or evaluate the merits of Dr. Grotz's ambitious plans for my treatment, and no family to protect my interests. Unrestrained, he was able to proceed with whatever means he deemed necessary to minimize my monstrosity. Right from the beginning, our relationship was fraught with tension. His unyielding long-term plans to normalize me were pitted against my fear, rebellion, resentment, and, perhaps most damaging, my mistrust. He was the one with whom I associated pain and fear and disruption of those few and far between lulls in my life when I was free from medical tampering or debilitating downtime for recovery. As the nurses, orderlies, and even janitors who showed me kindness came in and out of my life, only Dr. Grotz remained, although he was certainly no caretaker. tall and gaunt, with gray hair buzzed painfully short. He was the picture of austerity. Accustomed to getting his way, he spoke in a voice meant to intimidate, his Eastern European accent making him all the more frightening to me. He was perfectly suited for his work. His hands were unusually large, so large they seemed to eclipse the light when he held my head in his vice-like grip to examine the state of my face. His manner, every bit as cold as his hands, was predictably mechanical and devoid of expression. I always trembled when he walked into my hospital room, never knowing what he had in store for me. I just knew it wasn't going to be fun. There was a routine to his examinations. First, he would use his hands to assess my facial structure, his long fingers exploring my features like a blind man reading Braille as he turned my head this way and that. Then he would press cold instruments against my face to map out his plans, taking his time to precisely measure me, all the while sharply reminding me to stop squirming. I learned to sit like a mannequin as he worked to tailor a custom face for me. For him, I imagine, I provided the raw material for an experiment that could catapult his career, and I'd better not get in his way. All the surgeries of my childhood have melded into one memory, the particulars of which never seem to vary. My only clue that I was slated for an operation was on the evenings when I was forbidden food or drink after an early dinner. In the unsettling darkness of pre-dawn, a hand would shake me awake and roust me from my cage. Groggy with sleep and uncooperative in my disoriented state, I'd resist being helped onto a long gurney, my whimpering small body a tiny island in a sea of white sheets. My favorite orderly was a jovial black man who treated me gently, almost motherly. His enormous afro mightily impressed me, reminding me of Bozo the Clown on TV. "Good morning, little man," he would say in his warm, reassuring voice. "How you doing today? Don't you be afraid of nothin'. Everything is going to be A-OK. I'm right here with you." Fueled by his cheery talk, we sped along to my big sleep, as he'd call it. The gurney would follow the yellow directional tape on the gleaming gray linoleum while I watched the rows of fluorescent lights and ceiling tiles stream past overhead. Zooming down a last hallway and whipping around the corner, I'd arrive at surgery almost breathless after my thrill ride. As we parted ways, the orderly would whisper in my ear, "I'll be here when you get out, okay, little man?" I nodded solemnly before being rolled through the stainless steel doors and into the operating room. A burst of cold air would hit me, instantly triggering a ritual shivering that stemmed far more from fear than from the temperature. With my fists clenched to my stomach and my jaw chattering uncontrollably, I tried to avert my eyes from the trays of suspicious shapes hidden under white cloths, while the nurse tucked a doubled-over white blanket around my tense body, as if warmth would calm me. The smell of disinfectant ratcheted up my anxiety and dread. I knew what was coming. Waiting in the room were the usual masked players, 2 nurses, sometimes 3, an anesthesiologist, and Dr. Gratz. I can still hear him barking orders, and his underlings, as intimidated as I, scurrying to obey. "Good morning, Howard," he would say through his mask. "Are we ready?" I'm sure he was, but all I wanted was to go back to my warm bed and sleep. I never bothered to answer. What I wanted didn't matter. On center stage, under the blinding lamp, came the moment to insert the IV. It was the part I hated most, and I'd always lose it. "No, no, no! I don't want to, no!" I did everything I could to pull away as one nurse held my arm to the operating table and another wiped it down with an antiseptic sponge. I screamed in terror when I felt the prick of the numbing injection in my hand. Then the familiar warm sensation began to seep into my veins, whereupon the anesthesiologist would lean over to me to carefully fit the gas mask over my face. "Okay, Howard, count backwards for me." I never counted, but I could hear his voice fade into oblivion as he slowly recited 10, 9, 8, 7, and I was gone. Pain always awoke me. Inevitably, I would jerk on the IV in my sleep and jar the needle, triggering a blast of pain in my hand, a signal that the operation was mercifully over and I was in the recovery room. As I drifted in and out of a medicated, dreamless sleep, I gradually became aware of my fellow patients, each of us in varying states of consciousness and lined up in rows. Back in my bed on the pediatric ward and propped up on a stack of pillows, I watched as families bearing gifts of balloons and stuffed animals crowded into our room during visiting hours. I was always acutely aware of the difference in our visitors. Mine were all in-house. Nurses, candy stripers, interns, and the night janitors mopping the floors, each dropping in to cheerfully ask how I was doing, or to slip me a treat of ice cream or a picture book. Pretending to be asleep, I would peer through the slits of my swollen eyes and scrutinize everyone, especially the mothers, who would surreptitiously glance my way. Their looks were mostly of curiosity, though sometimes I saw sympathy or concern. Even so, they never approached my bed or included me in their visits. A nurse would interrupt. "Howard, here's your juice. Drink up." Slowly I sipped through the paper straw, trying not to mash it flat, while keeping an eye on every detail of family interaction going on around me. The parents fawning over their kids, the attention the young patients milked from their mothers and fathers, the tenderness, the impatience, the worry, all of it. It was a foreign world to me. Once I could keep my juice down, the tape securing the IV to my hand would be removed. This was the dreaded moment, but my reward was Jell-O, preferably red, my favorite. It was utter hell when the nurse peeled off the adhesive tape that bound my hand and forearm to the blue styrofoam board. I would scream and cry, the tears streaming down my cheeks as the nurse calmly went about her business, ignoring my pleas. "Howard, it's okay, we're almost done." When it seemed I could take no more, the needle was out, and the nurse would stroke my brow. "Shh, honey," she'd say. "Look, it's all over." And, sure enough, my consolatory Jell-O would appear on the tray. When I was quite small, a urinal complemented my IV, but as I grew older I was allowed to make my way to a closet-sized bathroom accompanied by an IV walker. If I could pee, I'd be given solid food, so I would stand at the sink trying to ignore the pain and hold my finger under a trickle of warm running water, which always did the trick. Then it was back to my crib, a few stuffed animals, and my 5-channel TV mounted high in the corner of my room. Though the nurses controlled the volume, I could control the channel by way of a long brown cord that snaked through the bars into my crib. I remember the Jack LaLanne show in black and white, and, when I was older, Captain Kangaroo in color. Utterly captivated by the treasure house, I'd hold my breath through much of the program. During those early years, when I was confined to the hospital, TV was my most reliable companion. In 1964, when I was 3 years old, the state of New Jersey placed me in a foster home. Concerns about the long-term impact of institutional living on such a young boy no doubt led to the state's decision. The first time I can recall being part of a family, I was sitting on a hardwood staircase, looking down through white banisters at the living room below. This was a real house in Morristown, New Jersey, and my new mom was tying my shoelaces. Obediently, I held out each foot as I scanned the puzzling scene. Everything smelled strange, too. Rather than the sharp odor of disinfectant, the pleasant scent of something cooking filled the air, and the unfamiliar smell of freshly mowed grass drifted into the house. I also noticed that the sounds were brighter and louder. I was officially the Mackeys' foster child. Ed, Big Ed, his wife Cheryl, their daughters Robin and Lisa, and their oldest, Frank, were my new family. I have no memory of meeting them in the hospital or packing my few possessions. Suddenly one day I was living with them. Their adjustment to having me in their midst must have been daunting. a scarred freak of a child with a stretch of patched-together skin in lieu of a nose, no lower right eyelid or upper lip, a gaping palate, and absolutely no social skills. In the early 60s, taking in a foster child was not a common occurrence, and though I never learned what prompted their decision, I knew that Shirl and Ed were generous people. They had met during the Korean War in a veterans hospital in Illinois, after Ed suffered a severe concussion that sent him stateside. As he liked to tell it, I was in Korea swimming in the ocean with my buddies when enemy soldiers started chucking grenades at us. I had to keep diving, holding my breath as long as I could. I don't remember much more of his story, but this made him a war hero to me. Anyway, Shirl nursed him back to health, and they fell in love, a classic war romance. Ed was a large, barrel-chested, dark Scot of a man with powerful, hairy forearms and a boisterous laugh, a man you needed to treat cautiously if you wanted to avoid his quick temper. A Jackie Gleason look-alike, jowls and all, he was a domineering husband and the kind of father who made it nearly impossible for his only son to ever win his approval. Raised in Brooklyn during the Great Depression, Ed jumped the sinking ship of his family at age 17 to join the Navy. His father's decision to leave when Ed was very young had imbued him with the determination to be a responsible family man. That early abandonment also left an indelible mark on his only brother, who tried to escape into alcohol, and then likewise disappeared. His mother moved to upstate New York and became a hoarder and recluse. In reaction to his clutter-filled, unstable childhood, Ed became a neat freak, compulsively cleaning and insisting everything be in its place. Incapable of sitting still, he could be found scrubbing the sink after meals, or meticulously organizing his tools on the pegboard above his workbench as he dreamed up his next project. The consummate home improvement guy, he had in Shirl and us kids an obedient, round-the-clock crew. As the oldest, Frank was given most of the responsibility for carrying out Ed's plans, which he in turn divvied out to Lisa, Robin, and me. Despite having only 6 years on me, Frank acted like he was from another generation. He had the advantage of being older, bigger, and stronger, but I always put up the good fight, never hesitating to go head-to-head against him, though I rarely won. Sharing our basement bedroom that adjoined the kids' den didn't bring us close. It was down there out of sight and earshot of parents, the linoleum flooring and wood paneling shielding the house above from our racket, that we lived out our power struggles and truces. It mattered little that we had a large bedroom, since Frank's half was more like 80%. Being not only younger but also the outsider, I accepted the inequity. The basement den was our private domain. By virtue of his seniority, Frank controlled the TV, so I always had to watch his picks. Creature Feature, the late-night horror movie series, or whatever show suited his mood. If Ed and Shirl were out, the bickering sometimes got so out of hand that even Lisa, the resident peacekeeper, would give up in disgust and retreat with Robin to our parents' bedroom to watch Shirley Temple reruns on an old black-and-white set. A fragile truce usually coincided with Frank's favorite shows. Our battles put on hold, we would sink into our beanbags chairs and soon become transfixed by the grisly horror unfolding before us. We'd mechanically stuff our faces with popcorn, and Frank, with his massive hands, would make sure to hog the lion's share. Popular among her peers, Lisa was rarely at home. Smart and pretty, with dishwater blonde hair, she was Daddy's little girl and knew how to get what she wanted. Because she was 4 years older than me, it was natural for me to fall in with Robin, who was only a year older. An exuberant, freckle-faced tomboy, she made the perfect companion. We played together constantly, whether it was chutes and ladders, go fish, or countless made-up games. Come summer, we cooled off in the backyard by running through the sprinkler, the arcs of water shimmering in the heat. To keep Ed happy, we made sure the brown spots on the lawn got watered. Our great discovery was the secret world in the acres of undeveloped woods just across the street. We would play our games of survival, climbing rocks, crossing the swampy pond on fallen trees, and building forts with broken branches. The minute Robin rushed in the door from school and dumped her books on the stair landing, we grabbed our snacks and raced for the woods, anxious to see how our lean-tos had fared in our absence. Rusted cans and Budweiser bottles were irrefutable evidence that we were not as hidden as we had supposed. So we'd tear down our camp and venture deeper into the woods to rebuild. It was a perfect place for me, no one to gape in revulsion to remind me of my freakishness. The Mackeys were probably typical of 1,000 other Jersey suburban families, with the exception of my being their foster child. I was treated like one of them and felt loved. But inside I knew I wasn't a real Mackey. My legal name was Shulman, and Leonard and Sarah were my biological parents. On top of that, strangers never let me forget how different I was. Whenever I complained to Ed about their stares or shocked glances, he said I was imagining it. But I knew I wasn't. I felt I was living in limbo, always on the brink of something calamitous. Life seemed precarious, and without hope of adoption, which was never a realistic option because of the astronomical cost of my treatments, I remained a ward of the state. Still, Ed and Shirl went out of their way to reassure me. "Don't you worry, Howard. You're a Mackey now, and you always will be." And it was true. I was part of the family, and included in every aspect. But it was another matter with Shirl's parents, my grandpa and grandma. When they arrived for a visit, there were warm greetings and hugs all around, except for me. And when crisp dollars were folded into francs and my sister's fists, there was never one pressed into mine. They refused to acknowledge my place in the family, treating me politely enough, but as if I were some neighbor kid who'd happened to drop by. I knew better than to expect birthday or Christmas presents from them. While my siblings were at school, I was Shirl's constant sidekick. She had put her nursing career on hold to be a stay-at-home mom, and although most of my care was routine, she still had a lot to learn. As my liaison with state social workers, she took on the overwhelming task of coordinating my medical scheduling. If she was ever taken aback by my evolving face, I never saw any sign of it. Not only did she feed, monitor, and mother me, she also attended my stitches and swellings, changed my bandages, and waited on me, doing it all with patience. I was 6 when I had my most radical operation to date, which was also by far the most excruciating. Dr. Grotz had decided he would use one of my left ribs to reconstruct a nose for me. This was a major procedure and meant I would be hospitalized for weeks. During my usual pre-surgery examination, Dr. Grotz attempted for the first time to explain the procedure in terms my 6-year-old mind could grasp, although he failed to mention the pain aspect. "Howard, we are going to give you a new nose, and you are going to look wonderful." Beyond that, I understood nothing of what he went on about. But when he plucked at the rib that would do the job, he caught my attention. To a young boy, a rib turning into a nose was no more outlandish than flying purple dragons. I had no power over my medical destiny and knew it. Shirl would announce upcoming procedures, and predictably I would run away. I knew it was futile, but I had no other way to protest. "I'm not going! You can't make me! I hate you!" I screamed. No words could express the rage I felt. Viciously, I lashed out, kicking chairs, the kitchen cabinets, whatever lay in my path. Slamming the screen door behind me, I'd tear off into the woods, choking on tears. When I reached the pond, I would launch an aerial attack of sticks and stones into the murky water, and when that failed to quench my fury, I blindly turned on leaves, dirt, cans, and trees, attacking everything around me. Finally spent, I could do nothing more than stare down at my disfigured face, floating on the watery surface, my features even more distorted in the reflection. I would lob a rock at my face, sending schools of minnows darting away. With nightfall looming, or when I could no longer bear the cold,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?